Welcome to this month's bonus episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the Fight Archive, where we ensure you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events. And boy, oh boy, would it be perfect to use for this weekend, as we have a plethora of MMA events to research, cover, gamble on, analyze, break down, predict, all of that good stuff. The Fight Archive ensures that you have direct links to past fights for all the competitors on these upcoming cards. This weekend alone, we have Cage Warriors 173, which I'm going to be breaking down for you on this card. And how I learned about all these fighters is thanks to the Fight Archive. We also have KSW 95, LFA 185, OKTAGON 58, PFL Europe 2, Risen 47, and Fury FC 91, not to mention 17 total promotions that we cover on this service with we're close to approaching 3,800 fighter profiles for you to research from and research from, and we have it all broken down for you guys, as you guys can see, in a nice, easy format, easily accessible, and probably one of the more thorough databases on the entire web in terms of direct fight links to all these fights for these fighters. So make sure you guys check it out. 7-day free trial available. Check out why over 75 members have signed up to the service. You can be one of them as well. Check it out for free for a full 7-day first, and then you can see what the hoopla is all about. All right, I did a little bit of a poll on my podcast earlier this week where I asked the public which regional show they would like me to break down for them, as I was going to be covering 5 of the events coming up this weekend on top of the UFC, and there was a lot of love for Cage Warriors. There's some love for PFL as well, and I'm currently recording this on Wednesday night. If I have the opportunity on Friday, I will record a PFL breakdown for you guys as well. So I'll give you a double header of bonus MMA Lockcast episodes this month, because it is such an action-packed weekend. But for the events that I don't end up covering, or if I'm not able to drop PFL bonus episode for you guys, you can find written breakdowns for all of these matchups on the Lock of the Night Patreon page, which is where I drop the majority of my content. That's where all the breakdowns drop first and foremost before I drop them to the folks, the public. That's where I have everything covered. I drop fun parlays, same game parlays, a lot of good stuff. The parlay party as well, where we get a little bit risky with it, but a ton of great content on there that I put a ton of work into as well. So if you guys want to support your boy and get those extra perks, that's the way to do it. Check the MMA Lock of the Night Patreon page in the description below. All right, with these bonus episodes, I do a pretty brief breakdown of every single matchup, not going as in depth about it as I do with the UFC breakdowns that I drop on the flagship MMA Lockcast episodes, but still enough information to give you a reason as to why I am leaning a certain way or the other for these regional matchups. So like I said, this weekend, we're going to talk about Cage Warriors 173. It's only an 8-fight card. We did have a late notice dropout, but then and also addition to the card as well. So I'll be breaking down that for you guys. So let's start off with the first fight of the night, which goes down between Miguel Peimbert, who comes in at plus 100. He goes up against Steve Mora, who comes in at minus 130. Now, Peimbert is a guy that relies heavily on his clinch game, which is what we saw last time around. That helped him snap a 2-fight losing streak that he was on. It was a very close fight. It was a split decision in his favor, but he is a guy that largely relies on getting opponents to the ground and utilizing his BJJ purple belt to try to get his hand raised. We saw him so comfortable in the clinch last time because he struggled to get his opponent to the ground, so he did a good job in terms of digging underhooks, putting his head in the right place, which is normally on the chin of his opponent, so he can pin him up against the cage and land some good dirty boxing, some good knees, and some good elbows. But his striking defense is where he has a lot of holes. He swings a little bit wide and wild for my liking, which allows opponents to really hit him and clip him and counter him, just as we saw his last opponent do, and just as we've seen prior opponents do as well. And I feel Steve Mora has that striking advantage here, where he should be able to land some clean shots on Peimbert, and he does a good enough job in terms of working out of bad positions up against the cage. I feel Peimbert will struggle to take Mora to the ground, and I have seen some flaky takedown defense from Mora at times, but he has shown some good enough submission defense and work off of his back that I think that he could eventually work back to his feet and then showcase the better damage with the striking advantage in this matchup. So I'm going to lean Mora, minus 130, not a bad line. If I could trust his takedown defense a little bit more to ensure that he's not going to give up too much control time to Peimbert, I would have a lot more confidence in him, but I still think that this is a solid spot for him to go out there and get a solid decision victory over Peimbert. All right, next up, we got Anthony Desilva coming in at minus 200, going up against Joseph Perez, who comes in at plus 160. Now, Desilva seems to be a little bit of a hyped prospect, but I don't really see it. He's 5-1 as an amateur. He's technically 1-0 as a pro, although he does have another win professionally in the Gladiator Challenge, a promotion which has been highly criticized in terms of having legitimate matchups or not. Topology chose not to count that last win for him, but he does have that one victory. He is a guy that seems to rely on taking his opponents to the ground and looking to submit them. His wrestling seems to need a lot of work. There have been times where opponents have taken him down as well and grinded him out, but I don't see the hoopla about him. He has some decent jiu-jitsu off of his back. He has some good control when he's able to get that top position. His striking, a little bit wild, leaves a lot to be desired. I don't really get the hype on him, and I don't understand why he's minus 200 here. Joseph Perez is a Marine Corps vet right now. I believe he's currently serving as well, but he's pretty much had his hand in all sorts of martial arts over the last several years, from wrestling to competing in no-gi competitions, even having a kickboxing record as well. The Topology record says he is 1-0 as a professional MMA fighter, where he scored a 43-second knockout back in December. His Instagram says that he's 3-1 as a professional mixed martial artist and 4-1 as an amateur kickboxer. So he has some decent chops, but in terms of the tape that we're actually able to see, all I see is him throwing a Superman punch and landing a big shot afterwards that completely stiffed his opponent, showcasing that he probably has some good punching power. So the question becomes, if Desilva is unable to get Perez to the ground, how is he going to end up winning this fight? But to me, it also comes down to the fact that Desilva looks like a guy that's trying to take mixed martial arts very seriously so that he can take it to the next level, whereas Joseph Perez is a little bit too tied up with the Marine Corps side of things. He's an instructor over there as well. I think his heart is more so set on the military service that he's doing rather than actually trying to make it to the next level with the mixed martial arts. Again, it's tough to say how good Perez actually is with the limited footage that we have on him, which is why I think this fight is purely a pass, unless there's something I don't know about Desilva and as to why he's minus 200 in this spot. Again, I am going to pick him to win, but I do think that this fight is more of a pass more than anything. All right, next up is a heavyweight matchup that got put together pretty much on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, to replace a different heavyweight matchup that actually got cut from the card. But we got Sean Rose coming in at minus 180, going up against Chadrick Kindle, who comes in at plus 150. Now, Sean Rose made his Cage Warriors debut back in September against a very strong wrestler who was able to pound him out in that first round. But that fight ended up getting changed to a no contest as his opponent, surprise, surprise, tested positive for steroids, and that fight was changed accordingly. Sean Rose seems to have a decent striking game, throws in combinations, not a whole ton of heat behind his shots, but he does have a good enough gas tank to go a full 15 if he needs to by putting on a good enough pressure and output with his strikes. Last time around against Diego Vasquez, we saw him get pretty much controlled for the majority of the first round against a jiu-jitsu black belt. He showcased some good submission defense, but in the second round where he was able to take advantage of his opponent who seemed to blow his wad, we saw Rose have a bit of a brain fart in terms of his fight IQ, end up in the grappling scenario with his opponent. He ends up getting reversed, getting put into an armbar and forcing to tap. Rose is trained with the likes of Phil Davis, Wilson Hayes, and those guys over there in the San Diego area. He seems to have some solid potential, but his grappling defense is a big liability, and that's why we've seen him drop those two fights to the grapplers that he's been facing. His opponent this weekend, Chadrick Kindle, comes from a Muay Thai background, and in his Cage Warriors debut back in February, we saw saw him start off the fight pretty quickly where he was able to hurt his opponent and drop him. And he did have some good success throughout that 15-minute mark, but his opponent was the one that just got the notch up on him and was able to land a little bit more repeated and sustained damage compared to Kindle, who was just having some big moments here and there. I think Kindle has a decent striking advantage here over Rose, at least in terms of the power and speed in which he can throw with. Rose might have an advantage in terms of the volume that he could go with. He might be able to mix it up in the grappling round, but from what I've seen from Kindle, his defensive grappling for a striker is not that bad, and I think he might find himself at times pinned up against the cage, but he does do some good work in the clinch with his knees and his elbows and his short shots up the middle. If he can defend the first few takedowns from Rose here, I think he can keep this fight in the middle of the cage where he'll likely have the advantage with his power, and it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up knocking out Sean Rose in this spot. So at plus 150, we're talking about a striker's battle here, even though Kendall physically doesn't look like the guy that would get his hand raised, nor does Sean Rose. And the fact that Kindle is up there at 34 years old, he has shown me enough in his last couple of fights that he has a good enough shot with his striking advantage here, and I expect him to go out there and knock out Sean Rose and cash an underdog ticket. Next up, we got James Settle coming in at plus 550, going up against Magomed Bayduev, who comes in at minus 800. We don't need to talk too much about this one. The minus 800 is warranted, in my opinion, although James Settle could make things interesting considering the unorthodox approach that he normally takes with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu style. He has that style where he can pull off submissions off of his back or reversals or even eventually work back to his feet, but he will be the guy that ends up having to settle on his back against heavier wrestlers and heavier jiu-jitsu players, just as I believe we'll see here with Bayduev. I'd be surprised if Magomed gets caught in anything here. He's still a little bit young in his career compared to the 10 total fights that James Settle has as a professional. So it wouldn't completely surprise me to see Settle snatch something off of his back, but I think Bayduev compared with the training that he had, the level of opposition he's been fighting up until this point, should have him more than prepared enough for that wacky and unorthodox jiu-jitsu style that Settle brings to the table. Minus 800, prohibitive to me. It doesn't really seem like a spot that I want to go too heavily in on, considering that this will likely take place in Settle's comfort zone, which is with his jiu-jitsu. But I do expect Bayduev to have the advantage pretty much no matter where this fight takes place. And from there, he should be able to grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. Next up, we got, we got Xavier Vines coming in at minus 275, going up against Diego Bigelow, who comes in at plus 215. Now, Xavier Vines actually got upset as a pretty solid favorite last time around by Corvin Allen, and that was a fight where Allen was able to put him through the ringer and stay pretty much a step ahead of him the entire time. Vines had some glimpses of success where he was able to get reversals and stand-ups, but Corvin Allen was dead set on getting his grappling approach going, and that allowed him to go out there and grind out Xavier. Xavier is a guy that normally relies on his physical advantages to go out there and get his wins. He utilizes solid footwork and good jabs and straight punches down the middle with the height and reach that he brings to the table. But also I've seen him go out there and grind opponents out up against the cage with his physicality by out-muscling them, out-strengthening them, and just keeping them pinned up against the cage and just really slowing fights down. He is best when he's able to dictate the pace in fights. Otherwise, we see in a fight like Corvin Allen, where Allen is able to dictate the pace, Vines really starts to slow down later on in matchups, and that's where Allen was able to be more and more successful as this fight continued on. With Diego Bigelow, he's coming into the Cage Warrior scene with a 2-2 record, exchanging wins and losses ever since he turned pro back in 2021. He seems like a fighter that has the basics of MMA down. His striking, a lot of it is with a double jab kick or a double jab cross down the pipe. He tries to mix in grappling, although I don't think he has the greatest technique in terms of holding opponents down. And he also gets a little bit overzealous at times, which leaves him open to getting caught in submissions or even getting caught in a striking scenario as well. We saw him lose his second last fight, I believe it was, to a guy that was 1-4 who was able to snatch onto a Mora after we saw Bigelow get a little bit too aggressive with his grapple-heavy approach. he does slow down as well if things are really not going his way. His last matchup that he won was a split decision against a Mongolian fighter. From the highlights that I was able to see, it seemed to be a slugfest where these guys were exchanging blows back and forth, very much willing to exchange in the pocket. But again, it was a split decision victory. I do like Vines here a good bit, as I think he is the cleaner striker here. I do also think that he can dictate the pace, which will allow him to manage his gas tank over the course of 15 minutes. It wouldn't completely surprise me if he ends up getting the finish here, but I think that the way that we'll see him approach this fight is look to shut down Bigelow's game, whether it's with his jab and his footwork, or even if it's with the clinch and the grinding grappling that we've seen from him in the past. But I think his physicality is going to be too much for Bigelow to overcome in this spot. So I'm going to go with Vines, and Vines by decision. He's jumped from about minus 220 to closer to that minus 280 range from the time that I studied this fight to the point that I'm recording this breakdown for you guys. So there's clear love coming in on his side. All right, next up we got Damon Wilson coming in at minus 600, going up against Brandon Carrillo, who comes in at plus 425. Now, Wilson is a guy that likes to utilize his grapple-heavy approach to try to get his hand raised, but unfortunately did not work out for him last year when he tried taking on John De Jesus, who did a great job in terms of keeping that fight upright and showcasing his striking advantage. Wilson did not give up on himself at all that night as he continued to move forward, looking for his takedowns, or at least looking to get some striking success going. But De Jesus, a veteran of the game, had way more experience against much tougher competition, and it showed through that night. I know Damon Wilson took that loss very badly, but he managed to recoup. He managed to get back into shape. He managed to, find his desire and find his fire once again. And I think that's why we're seeing him return this weekend. And I believe he is a guy with a little bit more experience, can actually be pretty successful and maybe even make it to the next level in the game. Very strong grappler, has good scrambling ability, good submissions as well, if that's something that he's able to latch onto. His opponent, Brandon Carrillo, is a guy that comes in with a 500 record and looks to notch his first Cage Warriors win this weekend. Last time around, he got out-grappled by Corvin Allen in a fight where he was the one initiating the grappling, but Allen was able to always reverse positions, get the better positions, and eventually pound out Brandon. I think Brandon is a little bit too overzealous in the grappling realm, especially when he doesn't realize he's going up against a better grappler. In this matchup, I think he might look to keep this fight upright, but I don't think that his defensive grappling is good enough to keep him upright, which will ultimately allow Wilson to get to what he does best, and that's grinding, that's grappling. I think he'll eventually open up a submission or a TKO opportunity for Wilson. I think it even happens after the 1.5 round mark, so that minus 125 line on the over 1.5 is not a bad spot either. Wilson, again, I do think he's talented. I do think he's a guy that can beat somebody of the level of Carrillo, but minus 600 is a little bit too wide for me to be fully entrusting him in this spot. Carrillo, it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to latch onto something here and catch Wilson. But I think we'll see Wilson showcase the superior jiu-jitsu, which will allow him to get him out of those spots, find those more grappling, grinding positions, riding the back, pushing him up against the cage, transitioning as well as he does. But I think eventually he'll be able to find that finish maybe in the second or third round. But I do like Wilson to win this matchup. All right, co-main event, very fun fight here. The top two fights here, very, very solid fights. We got Roberto Hernandez, coming in at minus 105, going up against Javier Garcia, coming in at minus 125. Now, this line has gone from, I've seen Hernandez as low as plus 115. Now he's coming up to about minus 105, so some love coming in on him. Last time around, we saw him go up against Liam Giddens a couple months back. I believe it was in March, where Hernandez went across the pond and fought Giddens in his hometown. And it really did not work out for Hernandez at all that night. I did not see the version of Hernandez that was going on such a hot winning streak inside the Cage Warriors scene, at least in the San Diego side of things, whenever they come on this side of the pond, where he really showcases solid striking, good combinations, digs to the body very well, has an active kicking game as well, has a BJJ black belt, which he doesn't rely on heavily from an offensive standpoint, but it's mainly just moving laterally a lot, waiting for the proper opportunity to cross the pocket, throw a combination or two, and then get back out into distance once again. It seemed to me that he broke right around that second round, third round, where he started dropping for leg locks and heel hooks, and we know that Gittens was just too experienced at that point in time to get caught in a submission like that. And And then from there, we saw Hernandez really start to slow down. It was a big red flag to me because I did not expect that from him. I'm not sure if it was the jet lag or, having to fight across the pond or anything like that as to why Hernandez showcased such a poor performance. But I know he is much better than what we saw that night. And we've seen it during the run that he had whenever he's fighting in San Diego. Now, this weekend, he's fighting Javier Garcia, who was actually the former LFA champion. He tried defending his title, he defended his title, or I think it was a vacant fight that he defeated Elijah Johns in the LFA. And they were scheduled earlier this year to compete once again for that title because of a bad call from the referee. It was I believe in the second round, we saw Javier Garcia lock on a arm triangle choke. And he seemed to have it pretty deep, but there was no tap from Johns, and the referee thought Johns went out. He stopped the fight, and Johns quickly got back to his feet and said, hey, I never tapped. In the cage that night, they ruled it a victory for Javier Garcia. A couple weeks later, they ended up overturning the decision, making it a no contest, which is why they ended up lining up the rematch. And then a week or two before, it might have even been 3 weeks, Garcia actually pulled out because he was in the running to be on the next season of The Ultimate Fighter, which just kicked off this past Tuesday, and he didn't end up getting the spot. So instead of going back to the LFA, he's fighting for Cage Warriors now, which is still another solid way and pathway to the big show, but especially to be put in a co-main event slot like this against a guy who just fought for the title, not a bad look. Garcia is a solid all-around MMA fighter, has some good power in his shots, leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of his striking defense at times. He's very aggressive from the top position when he gets takedowns, as we saw in that Elijah Johns fight, seeking submissions, looking to get his opponents out of there. I am impressed from what I've been seeing, and that 10-5 record, in my opinion, is not a good representation of how good of a fighter he actually is. Now, in this matchup with Roberto Hernandez, you're going with the aggression of Garcia versus the technical discipline of Roberto Hernandez, and I have to lean ever so slightly to the Hernandez side. I think that March performance was unlike anything that we've seen of him, and considering the technical striking advantage I expect him to hold here, I think he'll be able to catch Garcia off guard a few times and land the bigger and more damaging shots. Should this fight hit the mat, I think we'll see Hernandez showcase good enough defensive work. Excuse me. That he'll eventually be able to work back to the feet or at least reverse a position. I don't think you will see him gas out the way that he did against Gittins, especially considering that this is only a 3-round fight. But I think we'll see Hernandez utilize that lateral movement, crashing the pocket, landing some good body shots, landing some good kicks, maybe even landing a good shot to the head that drops or hurts Garcia very badly. Garcia is capable of hurting him in return as well, which is why I understand why this line is so close. But I do still lean on the Hernandez side. I think we'll see him end up landing the better shots, and that should allow him to go out there and get a decision victory. All right, main event time here. A staple in the Cage Warriors San Diego cards in terms of the main event. We got Wilson Hayes coming in at plus 110, going up against Cage Warriors newcomer Bruno Souza, who comes in at minus 140. Now, Wilson Hayes has made a very good name for himself in the Cage Warrior scene, especially whenever they come to San Diego, since that's where he's set up shop over the last several years. And he always seems to bring a crowd for him as well. We know what he's all about. He wants to take it to the ground. He wants to use his crushing BJJ approach to either open up submissions or look for a way to smother you, control you, and grind you out over the course of 15 minutes. Last time around, he was looking to bounce back from a loss that he suffered at the hands of Trevin Jones, and instead of going for desperation takedowns against Toby Misech, he actually trusted his hands. He threw with big power, and he eventually landed and dropped Toby, I believe in the second round, that was in the first round, and then from there jumped right to the full mount and was able to work for that arm triangle choke position where he ended up getting the tap from Misech halfway through that first round. That's a very solid approach for Hayes, right? If he can trust his chin, his durability enough, knowing that he's probably going to eat a few shots, but if he just throws with such vicious intent in return, he might be able to land a big enough shot to drop his opponents and then get his jiu-jitsu going that way, rather than expending so much energy looking for takedowns and trying to control opponents that way. His opponent this weekend, Bruno Souza, is a former UFC fighter who actually ended up going 0-2 and then got cut from the promotion and has exchanged wins and losses with Karate Combat over the last couple of years, but I also managed to squeeze in a matchup for Uriah Faber's A1 Combat where he was able to defeat former UFC fighter Teruto Ishihara. Now, Souza is a pupil of Lyoto Machida, and he fights pretty much the same as him. He uses a karate style, blitzing in and out attacks, good straight shots down the pipe, a very active lead leg, whether it's to the legs, body, or head, and he snaps it out there very quickly that opponents have difficulty in terms of trying to react to it. He doesn't throw with the most amount of power, which gives me a little bit of pause. He's a BJJ black belt as well, and I haven't really seen many opponents have success in terms of holding him down and controlling him there, because he does a good job in terms of scrambling and getting right back to his feet, which leads me to believe in this matchup that he should do a good enough job in terms of traversing the cage, touching up Wilson Hayes from distance, and if he is, if there is a takedown attempt put on him, I think either he'll be able to stop it or at least eventually work right back to his feet and then get back to his striking advantage. I wish he had a little bit more pop on his shots to make me believe he could actually knock out Wilson Hayes, or at least provide that much more danger in the striking realm, which would give me more confidence in him. But I still feel that he is clearly the much younger fighter here, way closer to his prime, and his speed and footwork should allow him to stay out of the grasp of Wilson Hayes and really touch up Hayes from distance. So I'm going to go Souza by decision over 2.5. Again, I just haven't seen enough on tape in terms of 100% trusting that Souza will be able to stay off the mat if he does get taken down. From what I've seen against fighters that are not of the level of Wilson Hayes in terms of controlling and grounding opponents, he's been able to get up against those guys. But against a guy like Hayes, that's yet to be seen. I'm hoping the age, speed, footwork, striking advantage is more than enough for him to stay out of those bad spots and snuff out any type of takedown that's going to be coming his way from Wilson Hayes. So give me Bruno Souza and Souza by decision. There you guys go. 8 fights broken down for Cage Warriors 173. I believe it goes down Friday evening, so make sure you guys tune in for that. We also have KSW going down that day, as well as LFA, and I'll be breaking down both of those on the Patreon page. So if you're looking for written breakdowns, make sure you guys check out the Lock of the Night Patreon page for that. And then on Saturday, we have PFL, which I will do my best to drop a video breakdown for you guys on Friday for. Excuse me. We also have Octagon 58, and then we have UFC to cap off the night as well. I'll have breakdowns for all of those good things on the Patreon page. Also on the YouTube, you can check out all the content there. Appreciate all the love. Appreciate all the support, and I'll see you guys again Friday for a bunch of content. See you guys then. Peace.